Half a day, the committee is back from recess. The time is now 9:51 a.m. We are here to receive testimony on Bill 362-36 COR, sponsored by Senator Sabina Flores Perez, as an act to add a new section 6225.2 of Article 2, Chapter 6, Title 4 Guam Code, annotated relative to the administration of hazardous pay for Guam Department of Revenue and Taxation, tax collection, and tax examination branches. To now provide an opening statement, Bill 362-36 is a measure that would extend hazardous pay differential to employees of the Guam Department of Revenue and Taxation, collection, and examination branches, who in addition to their position's requirements perform various law enforcement duties, which may involve filling in for U.S. Marshals that typically require tactical training and on occasion engage in proximity or physical contact with persons who are potentially hostile. These are considered hazardous duties in both federal and local law and are generally dangerous and both physically and mentally distressing. However, Guam DRT employees do not currently receive hazardous pay differentials despite the risks they face. Bill 362-36 would establish parity for these employees who periodically must place themselves in harm's way, putting them on par with fellow government employees receiving hazardous pay. It would entitle qualified Guam DRT staff to a 10% differential for the time worked while at risk of injury or significant physical hardship that's unmitigated by sufficient preventive measures such as safety gear, protective devices. Upon passage of this bill, the Director of Department of Revenue and Taxation and the Director of the Guam Department of Administration will be tasked with identifying direct exposure personnel to receive this differential, and they will develop a necessary protocol for personnel who periodically engage in direct exposure situations. We sent notices to directors of Department of Revenue and Taxation, Department of Administration, as well as the Guam Department of Labor. At this time, a fiscal note was requested, but it is still pending. Currently, we have Director Byrne. Thank you for being here and making your way through Guam to come here to testify. And so I'd like to acknowledge you for your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I apologize for my late arrival. I think I encountered every red light between Tumon and Hagatnia, but I got here. And thank you for allowing me to present some testimony on this bill. Department of Administration has, over the last 2 years, been tasked with administering hazardous pay to a number of government employees who previously weren't entitled to hazardous pay, most of it through legislation, and this bill, if enacted, would be a continuation of that process. I certainly believe that those who enter some kind of hazard should be compensated for that hazard. I guess what I would, though, hasten to say is that there are different types of hazards. Some of our law enforcement personnel more frequently and probably more severely every day encounter some kind of hazard that is and I hate to put it this way, but might eventually arise to the point where it becomes a critical hazard. Department of Administration doesn't have a whole lot of information on the hazards that are contemplated by this bill. I will certainly work with my colleague at the Department of Revenue and Taxation to focus in on this, should this bill become law. The bill requires it, and certainly, even if it didn't, I would want to work with the relevant director to make sure that a sensible policy arises. In doing that, I would certainly ask my HR department to I think, accompany those that are doing this task in order to better establish exactly what the hazard is and how it should be compensated. That wasn't possible with all the previous attempts, and successful attempts in most cases, to achieve those that should be entitled to hazard pay. And in one case, in the case of customs, we ended up by having legislation that effectively gave hazard pay to everyone, whether there was a hazard or not, because it was too difficult to ascertain exactly when a hazard arose. In this particular case, I believe because it's a limited number of people with a limited requirement to, and I'm sure as the legislation anticipates that this would be paid only when an employee goes out of the office in order to make a collection or make an assessment, then the HR will do their best to arrive at a determination of the actual hazard that's being encountered. I emphasize this because, as I say, I certainly have become aware over the last few months of different degrees of hazards, and we would want HR, certainly I would want HR to look into making sure that we have the best information on the hazards that are being undertaken. I think in conclusion, I would say that, I would not oppose such a measure. As I said at the beginning, I really believe that those that encounter hazards should be compensated for it. I would hope that both the supervision of the staff and the staff themselves would use sufficient common sense not to encounter a hazard unnecessarily, and if they don't need to actually enter a situation that might be hazardous, that they avoid it. And we try and tell people that all the time. But other than that, Department of Administration certainly would not oppose such a measure. Thank you, Senator.
Suzu's Masi, Director Byrne, for your testimony. And yes, I agree that, the federal government local law basically says that, it has to be mitigated. Basically, prevention, of course, is the best approach to dealing with hazards. But in the course of their duty to their job, that they have to do this. Basically, one of the tasks is process serving, and so it is normally accomplished by U.S. Marshals. But in their absence, DRT staff has been engaged in that, and so this is something that it is a requirement of their responsibilities, and which poses an unmitigated hazard. And so yes, this is something. This is one of the reasons why this bill was put forward, is to highlight the issue with law enforcement as it pertains to DRT. So I appreciate your testimony, and I do appreciate that you work with DRT to address this issue. I think the other issue is the updating of PDQs. So position, description, qualifications. I think overall, I think that needs to be addressed, and whether these jobs have this included in the PDQs. To your knowledge, has it been updated?
Not this particular position, not to my knowledge, Senator. We are making extreme efforts to update a number of PDQs, some of which go back many, many years. But we do depend upon the actually employing department to tell us which ones, other than the ones that I can obviously see. Like whenever I see, and this is an example not associated with hazard pay, but whenever I see a description that's word processing secretary, I know that we don't really use that position anymore, and it should be better described with a better PDQ. But we do rely upon the agency to tell us, and I will work with the Director of DRT in this case.
All right, Suzu's Masi, Director Byrne. I'd like to open the floor to my colleague, Senator Taidigui.
Suzu's Masi, Madam Chair, and I'm glad to see you're safe. You got here safely. I knew you were hurrying, so I appreciate your time. I was so hoping that Reverend Tax would be here because it makes it a lot easier to kind of determine what is the issue that you're facing together. I mean, you're the money man, you hold the purse, you know where all the funding is, and without a fiscal note, we really don't know the impact that this will cause. And I'm sure because we don't have one, do you happen to have the fiscal note?
No, and I think
Okay.
the issue seemed to be ascertaining which personnel we're talking about, but I will speak with my colleague at BBMR when I get back, and we'll make sure that we get a fiscal note to this committee.
It's always much better to, and you know, I've mentioned this before on some of the other senators having hearings without a fiscal note. You know, I prefer that we have it, give us time to really look at that and see the impact. So looking forward to that one as well. Mr. Byrne, does Reverend Tax have the ability to actually implement any kind of hazard pay without legislation?
No.
Or does DOA have that ability to do that?
No, Senator, because the previously implemented hazard pay covered those employees that are covered by post, and that was legislated that we could do so.
That's the 40% we're talking about?
Administratively, the 40%.
Hazard pay?
Well, whatever the hazard pay assessment was, it could be administered administratively if they're a post-recognized employee. These employees are not post-certified employees, and that's why separate legislation would be required.
What about, have you had the opportunity or worked with Reverend Tax to address this, you know, I think it's an unfair disadvantage. It's a disadvantage to those who do not actually get this type of hazard pay considering their work environment. It's obvious, you know, anybody going out for compliance or collections, such like that, you know, it's pretty scary, you know, out there. Not everyone's going to do that, right?
Well, I have to say that in another life, I was visited by some IRS collection personnel. I personally didn't think that I was a hazard, and I like to think that I was appropriately polite. They, of course, didn't know, you know, when at the first visit, and this is perhaps something that should be said, they didn't know at the first visit what a reaction the client would have. But subsequent visits, they perhaps do, and that's why I mentioned when I was talking to Senator Perez that we really need to make sure that these personnel employ common sense.
Yeah, not only that, but have training to do so as well. When you're entering anything kind of dangerous or could be perceived as something dangerous, because no one is as nice as you, Mr. Byrne, you know, coming to your door and knocking on your door, not a problem, but there are irate people out there. There are irate people, individuals who believe that they're, you know, I don't believe you, or they could be just very angry in a situation. So I hope that not only if we're looking at increasing this hazard pay, but we also provide that training needed when going out there. Have you looked in, okay, you mentioned earlier there was about what it would address about 7 or 6 people at Reverend Tax. Do you know how many people this would affect?
No, I didn't mention it, but I think that's round about the number.
7
but
or
I'm
6,
not,
like that?
It's somewhere between 6 and 10, I believe.
6 and 10. Okay. Well, have you ever looked into, I know the Hayes study is something that we had passed and had the ability to see if funding for these positions are adequately given the right amount of, at least an average salary. Do you think it would be best to just look at the person's salary in these positions than rather tag on a hazard pay? And have you looked into that kind of scenario instead of hazard pay?
Well,
And
that's
increasing?
really what I was addressing previously when we ran into difficulty with customs actually tying down or specifying exactly the hazard that was being discussed and the duration of exposure to that hazard. And it proved impossible to do. In this case, I think I would think otherwise, because these personnel don't spend the whole day in a position that might be hazardous. A collection officer would spend a lot of time actually in the office getting the information ready, and hopefully the information's accurate, as you say, getting the information ready. So it rather commends itself to a hazard addition when a hazard is encountered.
Right. So the exposure is quite low. So if you can, Mr. Byrne, I know you're going to be talking with Daphne, the director, and looking into this and how we can actually, if we can bypass a hazard and just increase the salaries to at least average salary of those who have this type of position and exposure, to increase their salary that way instead of, providing a hazard. This goes back since the 30th Guam legislature, on the 40%, for law enforcement. And then, we're still trickling and everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon at this point. So I think it would probably be best for recruitment purposes as well, providing a salary for this type of position would be a lot better than, a hazard. So I know that the salaries is not adjusted to what the true amount should be for an average on this particular position. So please look into that.
Senator, I will, but I suspect that when the position was first evaluated, some recognition of the hazard was indeed made. It may have been inadequate, and that's really what the point I was making is, as you go through the years, the reason for some of the makeup of people's pay, and the Hay study it basically ends up with three factors. That makeup gets lost, and I think that's what, in this particular case, has driven the demand for some kind of additional incentive, because these employees, in all likelihood, encounter situations that the remainder of Rev and Tax don't.
Definitely, and I thank you for that, and appreciate your time here. Please drive back to where you're going safely, and happy holidays to you, Mr. Byrne. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Taitui. Thank you, Senator Perez. I will drive back carefully.
Thank you, Senator Taitui, for the questions. And I want to thank you, Senator Byrne, for making your way here and providing testimony. And we do look forward to any collaboration that you can provide with DRT to support the staff in regards to identification and compensation, and also prevention of hazards. Very important that our employees have a safe working environment. So thank you for making your way down here.
Thank you, Senators.
Okay, so being that there are no other testimonies, the committee will continue to receive written testimonies 4 p.m. Thursday, December 1st, 2022. Please address all testimonies to Senator Sabina Flores Perez, Chairperson of the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning. It can be dropped off at the mailboxes here at the Guam Congress Building or emailed to office@senatorperez.org. The committee will publicly hear later at 1:30 p.m. Bill 361-36 and Bill 360-36. So at this time, we will be in recess until 1:30 p.m. Saduas Masi.